Ennis, 2 seconds. He'll get a shot off on the way. Got it! He hit it! He hit the shot! Syracuse wins it! Syracuse at the buzzer!
Hello, everyone, and welcome in to another episode of a Syracuse Basketball Podcast. I'm your host, James Szuba. With us today are Christian de Guzman and on site from the ACC tournament, Dom Chapone. Want to welcome these guys in, welcome you in as well. Thank you for joining us. A little bit of a scheduling note. Apologies, I haven't been with you guys recently. I've had some scheduling conflicts. Podcast has taken a back seat. But today, we're kicking it off. Dom from DC for the ACC tournament preview. Syracuse will get NC State Wednesday night, 7 p.m. Should be a good one. But first, before we get going, Dom, any quick notes? You're down there last week for the women's tournament, down there right now for the men's tournament. Anything standing out to you down in DC?
At least for now, real quick. Yeah, just got in a few hours ago. So Greensboro was awesome. It was a quick exit for the women's team, which was unfortunate. But news at least broke a few minutes ago. The ACC, in terms of attendance, was the first conference to reach 1.5 million people, in total, for watching that. So that's incredible there. In terms of DC, do not miss DC traffic at all. That's okay. But I'm staying right across the pond, if you will, in Arlington. And then I'll be on site as early as 11 a.m. tomorrow before noon game kicks off. And then obviously Syracuse third game on the slate tomorrow. So definitely exciting, hopping from one tournament to the next. And I'm very excited to be on site too.
Clearly, it was the ACC mascots causing all the traffic with all the promotional shoots going on today in the Capitol.
There we go. The blessing of the ACC mascots going down there in DC. So Dom, you didn't get in there today. You didn't hang out with Jim Boeheim down there.
I unfortunately I got in the train, got to Union Station at 4:30, so I was catching on my phone the entire NC State Louisville game, and then I've been unfortunately sitting in the hotel room the last hour watching my beloved Miami Hurricanes, currently down 13 to BC, which is unfortunate. But we'll be on site though, pretty much full on from tomorrow till championship Sunday night or Saturday night. So definitely gonna be throwing 4 days there.
Yeah,
Miami was supposed to be a top 4 team in the ACC this year.
There was a tweet that I saw a few days ago that was like, somebody needs to do a case study on Miami, and they were mentioning on the broadcast, number 10 in the AP poll got smoked by Kentucky, and then ever since they've lost 9 straight and 10 of their last 11. So, but Coach L's coming back at least. So now I only have to focus on one team that's my favorite, which obviously will be Syracuse tomorrow night. So that'll be fun.
There we go. Yeah, Miami and pre-poll, just so many injuries and such a tough season for them after making the Final Four and coming back and just wheels completely falling off the wagon. But in terms of the Syracuse game, I don't know about you guys, but I think one of the major storylines kind of coming into tomorrow will be how rested this team is. Do you take for a short rotation? Do you guys think the rest will help this team, or do you think it'll be a little bit of rust after kind of not seeing the basketball court for over a week now?
I think it's definitely going to be the latter. Unfortunately, I think this is a team that thrives on being sharp for games, and just based on how the intensity this team plays, even though they've switched back to playing more zone, just as needs have dictated, it's still a high intensity game plan that is required from this team based on how Autry has coached both on offense and on defense, even when they're playing zone. So I think game sharpness is definitely a factor that'll play into this. And, we saw Syracuse get off to some significantly slow starts in the past. Luckily, that hasn't hampered them against NC State. They've gotten actually out some pretty good starts against NC State, but that could be a huge factor coming into this game.
It sucks for me because I'm coming off watching the women's tournament where they got the double bye. And in that first game, they came out flat and were down as much as 27 points. So I'm kind of coming in with that bias of I just saw this happen. Does history kind of repeat itself a little bit here? But the main difference, at least when I'm looking at this, which I'll counter a little bit with Christian, is it also depends sometimes on the opponent. The big story for me is not just it's NC State compared to what the women's team had to face, which is a really good FSU team. But DJ Horne's potential absence in terms of he was such a big shot maker for NC State in both those games, including the most recent game, which Syracuse is in Raleigh, and he dropped 32 points, which led all scores, both Syracuse and NC State. I think that's the story there, because at the end of the day, Syracuse, I think, can get off to that strong start like it's done the past 2 times. The question is, how will the second half play out in terms of like maintaining a 6 to 10 point lead? Especially on defense, I think is the bigger concern. I don't think scoring will be the issue, but I think the defensive kind of consistency and kind of the things that SU thrives on, that's where I think there's a little bit more worry there.
Yeah, it's going to be interesting for sure, because, in years past, obviously Adrian Autry wasn't the coach in these years, but, last year Syracuse kind of struggled in that second half against Wake Forest. Obviously, we know the game winner. We know how it all ended. But in previous years, Syracuse has come out with their hair on fire in the ACC tournament, blowing the doors off of Florida State and then giving Duke a run for their money in 2022, excuse me. 2021 came out, had a good showing against NC State before bowing out to Virginia on another game-winning shot hit against Syracuse in the ACC tournament. And the COVID year before that came out and blew the doors off of North Carolina. So it'll be interesting to see how this team responds under Adrian Autry, under having a week of rest to come in, kind of playing with that short rotation. So I think that'll be a really interesting thing to see how they respond after that week of rest. But yeah, Dom, as you mentioned, the NC State, obviously Syracuse swept the season series, won 77-65 back in the Carrier Dome, and then took the road meeting 87. Much better.
He's used to the old name.
So yeah, it'll be interesting to see without DJ Horne in this matchup.
Yeah, it's interesting, because the other thing too, just real quick, I think small factor, this game not being in North Carolina and being in DC this year, at least coming from somebody who went to the Georgetown game, not saying it's only 2 teams, but there's definitely more of a Syracuse crowd than you would find in North Carolina, specifically Greensboro. So might be a little bit of a help there, because NC State, especially that second game, half their momentum was especially riding off that home crowd and kind of cutting that double-digit lead SU had back. So might be another little wrinkle for tomorrow's matchup.
Yeah, Syracuse proving why it owns DC and not Georgetown. Just, tails out this time.
Yeah, it'll be an interesting matchup for sure. Really looking forward to it. It will be quadrant 2 for whatever it's worth. If we want to look at the resumes, it will be a quadrant 2 game. I don't think there's much prevailing thought out there that Syracuse really has much of a chance to make the NCAA tournament. But it should be noted that a lot of bubble teams did kind of slip over the last week in college basketball. Some out there think that there might be a path to maybe 2 or 3 victories in the ACC tournament. But Syracuse is going to have to do damage either way, and maybe win the whole ACC tournament if it wants to go to the NCAA tournament this year.
It'll be a tough path, considering that, assuming a win over NC State, you've got Duke and then one of Virginia or Clemson in 2 straight games. So all of which, by the way, what is it, the 0-4 record this year? And historically not good versus at least 2 of those 3.
Yeah, on screen right now, if you're watching live on the Twitch stream, is the overall NET resume net resume that Syracuse possesses. And unfortunately, because this is the main system that the NCAA uses, even though there are so many other good metrics that go in the way of Syracuse, like its strength of schedule, its current RPI is up at 36. This net is at 79, which is just not where Syracuse needs it to be in order to make a good at-large bid without winning the ACC tournament.
Yeah, a lot of discussion around the net. I think a lot of Syracuse fans are still poo-pooing the net after trying to make sense of it over the last, really extensively the last month, but maybe the last 3 or 4 years. It has been dubbed as the main sorting tool for the quadrants. As we know, it's not the end-all be-all. It's not heavily considered, but it is the sorting tool. It does kind of quantify the different games into quadrants. Quadrant record obviously will be very important. Syracuse's resume is really interesting because the strength of schedule numbers are there. Unfortunately, the RPI looks better than the net, but they will use the net strength of schedule when evaluating Syracuse. But yeah, either way, Syracuse is going to have to do some significant work to improve these numbers. The predictive metrics don't love Syracuse as much as the results-based metrics, which is another interesting facet within this resume. But yeah, you're looking at a Syracuse team that's going to need to knock off NC State, Duke, and then, as Dom mentioned, maybe one of Virginia and Clemson. But given the way that Virginia is playing and given the way that Clemson is playing, it's hard to think that it would not be Clemson. And we know how those two matchups have gone earlier this year with a lot of size difficulties to hell no for Syracuse.
Yeah, that's probably the biggest theme for this year's ACC tournament. It's kind of honestly a little bit similar to last year, but it's more heartbreaking because this team is way better on paper compared to last year and has better wins by far than last year. But it's also that thing of unless we also know realistically winning out the ACC tournament is probably the only realistic path to postseason contention. So part of it's you want to see how this team performs, especially a lot of the younger guys after last year's game. And with Adrian Autry's first technically postseason atmosphere, postseason game, however you phrase it, there's also the idea of technically the season's already over. Maybe there's an NIT bid to look forward to. But I'm kind of honestly more fascinated with this year's kind of slate and tournament in particular because there are a lot of young guys that I'm kind of excited to see. I'm excited to see what Judah Mintz can do kind of in his second run, especially now as the primary guy. I'm excited to see Malik Brown shine defensively. Can a guy like Chris Bell, he had an amazing game last year versus Wake Forest. Do we see another repeat of that? Because he's been really killing it lately. So I do think even though there is that they're probably not going to make the postseason, there's still a lot to look forward to, in my opinion.
Yeah, a lot of storylines. Chris Bell obviously really likes playing against NC State. Do you think Draymond Green will be tuned into this game?
Maybe. Only if he sees that Bell was doing other than pulling up a chair in the corner for the entirety of the second half.
Draymond's going to want Chris Bell to be running off flare screens, drag screens, pick and pops, decoys.
All the screens.
I don't even know all the terminology.
Everything, yeah. God, what good is a pick and pop play if you don't use it? Come on, guys.
Exactly. Whatever is going on out there, we can rest assured that Draymond will not be satisfied with how Adrian Autry's coaching.
When was the last time Draymond Green was actually satisfied with basketball?
You'd have to go back to 2016, maybe 2017.
Probably, yeah.
Yeah.
But yeah, I'm just thinking, Chris Bell, 8 threes in the first half of that NC State game on the road, and then none in the second half. That's in and of itself an own Syracuse record. But one shy of the 9, the all-time mark. Don't think he'll be doing that tomorrow. Pretty sure NC State will have that well scouted for and accounted for. But in terms of the actual game, we know what NC State is, right? DJ Horn has been dealing with a little bit of a hip flexor. He's supposed to be a game time decision for the Syracuse game. Was a game time decision against Louisville. Did not play. Down low, DJ Burns represents a problem for Syracuse defensively. I think we know Syracuse will be looking to exploit that on the offensive end with Malik Brown and kind of taking him away from the hoop. But in terms of this overall matchup, is there anything specifically within the game that you guys will be looking for?
Definitely, Peter Carey. What do you? I mean, obviously that's
yes.
DJ Burns is shaking in his boots.
It works last time, right?
You got to play all your cards now while it's the postseason, I guess.
Yeah, I think definitely it's definitely going to be now. So Syracuse has definitely changed since the last time that they've played NC State. I mean, both times it's kind of been the quote unquote full strength Syracuse team that you could possibly get, and so that allowed Adrian Autry to go a bit deeper into his bench to just play constant man. Now you're going into a Syracuse team that it just fundamentally looks different. It's back to the same short bench. You're going to be mixing up the defenses a lot more. We both have its strengths and weaknesses. So it's going to see how interesting to see how NC State adjusts, especially since Syracuse offensively has actually been kind of consistent scoring wise, around the 75, 80 points marks per game, which is something I didn't think I'd say at all this season, is that we'd see some sort of consistency in that area. But of course, it's been the defense that, for the past 4 or 5 years has always been the question mark for Syracuse. And that continues to be the factor. And so can you limit how effective Burns is inside, while at the same time not ignoring anybody on the outside? Because we've seen it from NC State. Any one of their players will make a three, even if their shooting percentage is woeful on the season. And we saw that in both games from Syracuse and NC State this season. So it's not like you can ignore any of NC State's players on the perimeter, because just based on how Syracuse defends, 9 times out of 10, they're making shots. So can Syracuse pick itself up from the lackluster performance against Clemson on the defensive side and turn it into at least some sort of momentum that they can take from this NC State game into the rest of the tournament? Will be interesting to see.
Yeah, Dom, I don't know if you have anything to add, but just watching that Louisville NC State game a little bit earlier, it's such a difficult ask to double DJ Burns, because he's such a good passer and he's not intimidated by that double team at all. Just kind of shrugged off the Louisville doubles earlier. It does make me, obviously these teams have played each other twice. It does make me wonder if Syracuse will go back to that zone again in this game, especially if DJ Horn is not in there. He's probably their top. Well, he is their top scoring threat, but top perimeter threat as well. So I wonder if that factors into this game at all.
I can add on that just in terms of like the offense in particular. I think probably going to be the point I was going to bring up, like what's a thing that's going to stand out. Syracuse's perimeter shooting, because the conversation could be both that NC State relative to its season average shot poorly in both games, or like just below that in that number. Syracuse overperformed on the outside shooting in both those games. To put the numbers on it, it was 7 for 18, which is like about like 30-something%. Like that's pretty good. I think mid 30s. And then they were 9 for 17 with Bell having the 8 for 10 game last time from 3. I think they're probably going to switch to a zone, especially without NC State's top scorer, because I think you kind of need a way to keep the pace up, if you will, and kind of like this Syracuse team in particular with the smaller, switchier, kind of like recap with the passing lanes. It just thrives better on getting out in transition. I also think it might provide some insurance in the event that, Chris Bell is up to 42% from 3. I'm hoping he can shoot 42% from 3 still throughout this tournament, but that's not a guarantee. And outside of a couple of guys, because the rotation is so limited, that means also that the ways to score on the court are also limited for Syracuse. So I imagine probably more zone there. Interested to see, I think, also kind of what's the way in which Syracuse attacks NC State's defense, because if you recall the first game, which was that awesome home win, it was arguably the best, because I remember I did the coverage on it, the best that Judah Mintz and Starling played together at the same time. Starling had 26 points that game, and he was awesome, and Mintz had 20 points and 9 assists. The following game, which is on the road, definitely more of a nail biter there. That was Chris Bell's mega efficient shooting night. Quadir Copeland also had 25 points that night. And that was a game where both Mintz and Starling also hit double figures, but way below kind of that first game versus NC State. I think those are probably the two big things for me in terms of like, where's the offense coming from and what is Autry's strategy of attacking NC State's defense in particular? Because that's definitely going to determine pace of the game, determine where the shots are going, and determine kind of what kind of Syracuse team we might see on Wednesday night.
Yeah, it's interesting going off that most recent NC State game where the production was inverted and Chris Bell kind of had the monster game. Starling and Mintz a little bit more muted. Judah was able to get to the free throw line, as he so often does. I would have to imagine that would be an emphasis for him in this game. Him and JJ kind of just attacking, getting downhill. And one would think that a lot of Malik Brown and high ball screen, if he's got DJ Burns on him, that they would want to take him away from the rim. And as we've seen a lot of times this year, those Syracuse guards command a lot of attention. Hard Hedges, doubles, those guys come out. Malik Brown, very, very good in the short roll, gets it to that kind of like 15 to 18-foot spot. And from there, he's just making a read. He's either attacking the basket or putting pressure on the backside and finding Chris Bell or Justin Taylor open on the opposite wing for a three. So I'm curious, Justin Taylor kind of had some production in that Notre Dame game a couple of weeks back and then tapered off. I'm wondering if he can get going in this game. And then, what that all does mean for Malik Brown kind of just attacking and getting downhill against the backside of that NC State defense, because he's been so good in that role all year, really. And those guards just command so much attention scoring the ball. So I would think we'd see a lot of Malik Brown in this game.
And real quick, just to add on, because this was a stat that kind of blew my mind. So in the 2 games versus NC State, in the first one, Syracuse outscored NC State in points in the paint by 2. And on the road, it was the exact opposite. So in other words, there's no advantage or disadvantage for Syracuse in points in the paint. And that's honestly better than I thought it would. I think that you're probably going to see a lot of guards attacking the basket and kind of forcing the refs to make the call, kind of like kick out situations for Bell, Copeland, Starling, kind of any combo of that. So that was just a stat to me that I honestly thought NC State would have more of a interior scoring advantage, if you will. But based off the 2 games, it's a dead even, which is a good thing, I guess.
I think it's going to be a high tempo game. I think you got to push it on offense and at least on the Syracuse side, and then obviously on the defensive end is do what you can to slow it down. I think, and especially if Syracuse is going to play zone, slow it down and force NC State to go deep into the shot clock and make them look for a shot. I think Syracuse showed that especially in the first half of both of the NC State games, it can win the tempo battle. And if you can establish that once again, it's an opportunity for Syracuse to be comfortable and also play in front, which is, as we know, across all sports, is the easiest thing to do, play in front. And I think by establishing tempo early on, that'll be the best way for Syracuse to do that. And it showed in both of the games against the Wolfpack this year.
Yeah, one of the interesting things about the way that Autry wanted to run this program, going back to his initial press conference, kind of the early press conference in the preseason, that Melo wants to play with pace, wants to play with space. All that's kind of been accomplished this year. Syracuse is 40th in the country in adjusted tempo per KenPom. Interestingly, though, a lot of that pace comes from the defensive end, where Syracuse has played fast. I think a lot of that has to do with turning teams over. Syracuse has been pretty good at that this year. On the offensive end, Syracuse is averaging 17 seconds per offensive possession, which is 108th in the country, but 40th in the country in adjusted tempo. NC State's going to want to slow it down a little bit. They play at a very moderate pace on both ends of the floor, especially on the defensive end. They're going to want to make Syracuse kind of slow down and really attack that NC State defense. So that's an interesting component of this game as well, is just how fast are these teams willing to play when perhaps both of their rosters are limited and the depth is limited in this game.
If we're on that note, what's the line set in terms of how many Syracuse players see the court Wednesday night? It's probably 7.5, and it depends on if Cuff gets 6.5, 7.5.
I don't think it's more than 7. I think it's Copeland, and I think it's Carey. I don't think Cuff gets in this game.
Yeah. Well, short rotation, no foul trouble tomorrow. That's gotta be the policy.
Yeah, would not be surprised in postseason playing for your postseason life to see, J.J. Starling and Judah Mintz go extended minutes here, especially after a week's rest.
Yeah, it'll be.
Cuff did knock down 3 threes in that Clemson game, though, for what it's worth. I mean, 2 kind of came at the end, but he has shown himself to be a very willing defender. I think he's been pretty good in his role. I'm curious to hear what you guys think, but he comes in and he plays defense and he plays hard, and it's so hard to find rhythm coming off the bench like that. and knowing that your minutes are few and far between, that you really only got maybe 2 or 3 minutes to be in there. And he's knocked down threes when he's gotten his opportunity. So it's not necessarily he's done anything wrong. It's just like Judah Mintz and JJ Starling are so good.
I think that's just a lot of what Syracuse has right now. It's a bunch of, if you look at this from like an NBA's point, they'd be just a bunch of role players and not necessarily someone like a Judah or a JJ who has the ability to potentially take over a game. And that's why, Judah and JJ, more so Judah, obviously, are getting draft looks because they do have that ability to just, go ahead down and take over a game. Unfortunately for Syracuse, that's sometimes not always for the best. But with pretty much every other player on the team, it's basically like they fit into a role and they fit into it, for what it's worth as well as they possibly can. But it doesn't always necessarily add up into the best winning formula, just based on the roles that are essentially filled on the floor.
Well, also I assume teams could probably game plan that better. If like the one credit to Autry, especially the last month, I would say is at least those roles have been very solidified and he's maximized. I would say probably, for example, Malik Brown being more of a offensive threat and more of like a downhill threat. I think Chris Bell involving him less as a stand in the corner and more as a kind of movement across the perimeter and kind of get him down the middle. Kind of like take advantage of like his ability to kind of shoot on the move, etc. Starling obviously has seen more of a scoring role compared to the first half of just this entire year. So that's a credit there. But Christian, as the downside is that not necessarily successful. And part of that is that, for example, NC State, even though this might be a different iteration, they have seen essentially the same 6 to 8 man core in a previous matchup and kind of can game plan. Syracuse ain't going to change much because they really don't have a choice because of the limited options. So that'll be interesting to see how NC State definitely adjusts on both ends, honestly.
Yeah, limited options for sure for Syracuse at this point in the season. Obviously, depleted depth, but beating a dead horse. Yeah, we'll see how the week of rest does kind of impact the team and the rotation and just kind of how they look in that game tomorrow. Taking a look at kind of Syracuse's path here. Obviously we talked about that Duke game, and if Syracuse were to make the semifinals, it would be the farthest that Syracuse has ever gotten in the ACC tournament. Do you guys think Syracuse has much of a chance here in this field? I mean, Duke's in a bit of an interesting position. We saw how these teams squared off if they are able to get past NC State. They did meet in early January down at Cameron Indoor, and they hung with them for a half before Duke really kind of took control of the game in the second half. But do we think Syracuse has much of a chance of a run in this tournament?
No. And I think it's just when you look at all of Syracuse's losses, especially the quad 1 losses, a lot of that has to do with who their opponents have in the forward departments. And as much as we like Chris Bell and Justin Taylor and Quadir Copeland on the offensive end, defensively, and they're just not up to it yet in terms of the competition they're facing. That's why we always keep on saying, or at least I keep on saying that, Bell and Taylor and Copeland are better off as guards. But unfortunately, based on the matchup that Syracuse has and the lineup makeup that Syracuse has, they have to play as forwards. Also, the reason why everyone is so excited for Donnie Freeman to come next year, just because they desperately need another person in the forward group. Just based on how Bell, Taylor, and Copeland play, they're better off playing as guards, but they've had to play in forward spots. And when you come up against superior competition, especially in the ACC, who has the ability in the 3 and 4 to be more physical on the defensive end, when Syracuse is on the defensive end in that 3 and 4 spot, that just proves to be too much for Syracuse to overcome.
I guess to add on that, the other challenge, if you will, especially with a team like Duke or even Virginia, those are two of probably the most disciplined teams just in the country. Syracuse doesn't have as many of those kind of like grab and go, get like, a quick 10-point advantage and fast break points by the end of the game, let's say, because those teams play a lot smarter. They will capitalize way more on Syracuse's mistakes. In other words, it would kind of need to play out like that. Honestly, like the UNC game, which I know is the easy one because they won, but think about how well it was where their offense was just full blitz mode, shooting over 60%, barely turned the ball over. Like, I think probably that is the only outcome where you could see Duke do it. Even then, I'm more concerned because at least with Duke, when I was there in Cameron Indoor watching that game, they hit like 5 or 6 threes in a row. Like, that's the type of team where they can just get hot. And Syracuse's offense has been good. Can it keep up at a rate like Duke where they're consistently in the low to mid 80s in scoring? Like, that gets a little bit tougher to I'm trying to come up with a way where you can like math it, where Syracuse can get to 80 points versus that elite defense. And time again, they've been more in the 60 to 70 range, which is great, but not great enough for an upset win necessarily.
And again, the tough part is, like, if Syracuse wants to play man defense, the forwards are going to take over. If they're going to play zone, then the guards are going to have a field day with open threes. That's just how the cookie crumbles with how the Syracuse defense is playing right now. And because of that, it just makes it hard for Syracuse to correctly formulate a game plan as to how they're going to stop a team defensively from getting 80 points before they can.
We can't predict to the Virginia or Clemson or whoever makes it in that semifinal spot, but we can say, like, even remember the Duke game like 2 years ago. I don't know the exact score off the top of my head, but Syracuse, it was tied like 89-89. Like, it was one of those where Jimmy Boeheim scored out of his mind, Cole Swider scored out of his mind. That was all without Buddy. That was one of those like just days where everything was going in. So
yeah, remember why Buddy didn't play that game?
That was, for the record, not a way to try to bring that up, but alas.
Hey, maybe we should get some video review here, huh? Anyone?
It is a storyline heading into this week of will Syracuse. Do we hear any Kyle Filipowski suspension news between now and and Thursday night?
The answer is probably no, because they would have done it by now.
Yeah. Syracuse fans holding out for a Filipowski suspension. Please remember to breathe. Do not hold your breath. And Syracuse is able to get past NC State. Fully expect to go up against Kyle Filipowski. And shame on Harrison Ingram for running into his foot, but we'll leave it there.
Make sure
it'll be interesting.
Syracuse fans storm the court in DC if Syracuse wins.
There we go. Then we'll have Jay Billis carrying water and saying that everyone needs to be.
Is Billis on the call? Yeah. Is Billis on the call? If he's so, that means he's got the National Guard on speed dial if necessary. DC Metro Police ready.
I would think so, because he's there tonight, I believe, right? Or maybe not for the opening round games, but if it's ESPN on the night, I would think it would be Billis, right?
Isn't it 2 at night? So
it's a double header. But I'm saying tomorrow, the Syracuse plays in the 7 p.m. game, and then it's Clemson, and then the winner of Boston College, Miami. Wouldn't he be on back-to-back if it's the night cap?
So he might be in the morning. What I remember, if I remember correctly, I thought he might be on in the morning because that'll be on main ESPN. But at night, it might switch to a different team because it might be on ESPN too. Or if I'm just misremembering the schedule.
I gotcha. Maybe I'm thinking of like the semifinals and the championship when he's usually on.
Yeah.
So maybe that's why I'm confused.
Yeah, probably. Yeah, most likely for that. But for this quarterfinal round and for this second round and then the quarterfinal round, probably the night games. They probably won't have him and Shulman on.
Well, they can't put Jim Boeheim on with Wes Durham and Corey Alexander, can they, for the Syracuse game?
Why not? I mean, I think that just be a wet dream for ESPN to have Boeheim call a Syracuse game.
Who could have envisioned this? Jim Boeheim calling the ACC tournament a year after Wake Forest,
and not only
Appleby knocks there.
Who envisioned Jim Boeheim going into the media in the first place? Let's get that out of the way. Second of all, now we're in this timeline. What are we doing?
It's kind of fascinating to see how that's all developed. I don't know about
just
you guys.
No one on Syracuse put up the 3 goggles. Just don't.
Yeah, nobody's allowed to do 3 goggles, especially if you haven't won anything lately. If you're a losing team, you don't get to celebrate at all.
No.
A lot's been made of Boeheim, and there's a lot of opinions out there. Like, personally, I think he's been great. Like, not only is he so informative and like takes you inside the coach's mind during the game. Like if you look at it through that lens, he's kind of got the coach's mind. I'd find Jim very entertaining. I don't know. I've heard him call a lot of games this year. I think he's much better on color than he is in studio. But man, that guy's very entertaining. He was on point during that Louisville and NC State game.
If you've seen anything of Jim Boeheim, you know that he feeds off the energy of a stadium. And when he doesn't have the energy of a live game, it's definitely not as interesting to be around him. Unless he's shooting a risky business 90s commercial with Otto in his living room.
Dude, oh my God.
Another gem over the week. Jim pulls no punches on the broadcast, though. He tells you what he really thinks, as he is wont to do. And
did anyone not see that coming?
Survey says
no.
Yeah, so we'll see if Syracuse is able to get past that NC State. The Duke matchup will be interesting. Dom, as you kind of mentioned, you were down there in Cameron Indoor earlier this year, and the second half defense, transition defense, Syracuse really gave up a lot of threes to McCain on the backside, kind of gambling, and those will be things that they would like to correct in that other meeting. But yeah, defensively, I'm just not sure Syracuse has the answers for this Duke team against, especially a Filipowski. Donnie Freeman could probably be used on this team right now. It's kind of the role we envisioned Benny Williams to be in, right? Kind of like that stretch four guy who can kind of bang with some bigger bodies down low to defend, but also stretch it.
What about Elijah Moore? Do you think Syracuse could use him right now?
No, if not only because I can't imagine his role would be much more expanded than on what Chris Bell can do.
Did you see his latest game?
We need all the guards. All the guards.
Throw another guard out there.
No, but did you see the stat? Elijah Moore just put up 67 points on senior night.
67?
Oh, okay.
He may or may not have gone 13 of 19 from three.
Oh my goodness.
Oh my gosh. Okay, we could use that. Now that the 13 for 19 from three we can use.
Well, who do you sit? Who do you sit Chris Bell? You sit Justin Taylor and play Chris Bell at the four? Let's go four guard.
Four out one end.
Yeah,
it'll be
interesting.
Yeah. Once again, just like we said at the beginning, just like the conversation you and I had, James, at the beginning of the season, the lineup balance was always going to be a problem for Syracuse, and it doesn't look like that's going to change.
No, and Autry wants to get his versatile guys in there, so I think that's kind of what he's doing. Not to look too far ahead to next season, it'll be interesting to see if Syracuse does anything in the transfer portal, who does leave, and what that means for the roster and kind of the makeup, what that means for the center position. Naheem McLeod's obviously a big dude out there, but he can't do what Malik Brown can do, maybe operating on the short roll, something Syracuse wants to do offensively. So there's a lot to consider there. I don't want to look too far ahead to next year while we still have basketball to play here, but yeah, defensively there's a lot of limitations, and offensively maybe Syracuse could get a little bit more shooting at the guard next year if Judah Mintz is to leave. So that'll be something to watch for how this roster is constructed in the offseason.
I mean, it's not a bad thing to look at, because even though I'm optimistic personally, if we're doing make a prediction, I'm hoping that there's a win over NC State and at least a competitive game versus Duke. But just like that, we're taping this Tuesday night, we could be Wednesday night already technically in the offseason to an extent, and kind of looking ahead when all you've got is potential with the NIT. So the cloud that looms over until whatever day that Syracuse loses, unless we do get the miraculous, never done before ACC championship run, which also would be exciting.
We will never say never.
Exactly. We have to find out.
It is in DC. It is a homecoming for Judah Mintz. You never know how that might affect a player who potentially might feel spurned for being on the second team and not the first team. Never know how that would motivate a player. We could touch base on that real quick. Adrian Autry did finish third in the voting for ACC Coach of the Year. Perhaps predictable Hubert Davis Coach of the Year. Maybe an uninspiring pick, but one that does make the most sense. even if we know how Tobacco Road is, how the ACC handles voting with so much influence on Tobacco Road. Quadir Copeland finished second for the ACC Sixth-Man Award. I was slightly surprised on that, only because I didn't think Leggett was a six-man candidate. And Malik Brown named to All-ACC Defensive Team, which was much deserved there.
And also the good news that Donald Toto reported, saying that Malik Brown is coming back for next year as well, which is
huge.
Obviously a very, 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 very good sign. And
Brad Brown Allen shambles.
Indeed. We just need James to get back up in the dome and introduce Malik to some pizza so that he can complete his transformation fully into Marek Dolezaj.
Plays like him, is efficient like him, is short in his words like him, does not eat pizza like Marek Dolezaj. I don't know too many people who can eat pizza like Marek Dolezaj.
I just think it's what we've now slowly started to see, especially with this kind of short rotation that Syracuse has been forced into, is that his passing has actually gone up now to the level, not quite the level of Mark, because that was almost impossible to replicate, but it's getting up there to being a very competent passer for a natural forward, which has been so key for Syracuse.
Yeah, so effortless with him on that short roll. Usually on those short roll situations where it's kind of a 2-on-1 or on the backside where the defense is forced to play and help, and it's either just an easy attack of the rim or the defense is over helping and it's an easy pass. It seems like it's just such an easy read for him in that situation, which is not always easy for guys who play the center position. He's more of a forward playing the center, and he has those ball handling and passing skills. So it makes sense why it's so easy for him. But he does so many things well for Syracuse, and his versatility and availability has been such a huge advantage for Syracuse this year.
Well, Christian, having him back with Donnie Freeman should be very exciting, regardless of what the role is. So that's gonna be awesome.
I mean, remember when Jim Boeheim said he was when Marek was in consideration for taking his COVID year, and Jim was like, "No, don't do that because I can't have you playing as center again." And look at where we are now.
More things change, the more they stay the same.
Time equals flat circle.
Time is an infinite loop. Syracuse is playing a 2-3 zone, a 7-man rotation, and an undersized center. So here we are. Yeah,
it actually never changes. It's incredible.
Yeah, well, we'll see. Like the one interesting thing that again, we're talking a lot about next year, but the one interesting thing about next year is like Chance Westry's going to be back. I don't think Chance Westry's going anywhere. And what does that mean for Syracuse? Because he was talked about at Auburn as, one of the best players at Auburn before he got hurt. And in the preseason and very limited action, looked very, very good and kind of like that pick and roll and being able to read and get by guys. And he's got so much tact to his game, a little bit like Judah Mintz, where getting in front of guys, using his body, that sort of stuff. And I think we all know Chance to be a really talented player. So if Judah does leave, it's like that just makes things a little bit more interesting at that guard spot next year.
Well, go ahead.
Yeah, I'll say it obviously, again, way too early on this, but some things to think about in terms of like what is this team now versus what is this team next year. Assuming Mintz or no Mintz in the fold, there's a lot of guards on this team that need the ball in their hand to kind of like drive to the rim. You imagine, again, like you said, perimeter shooting, whether it's at kind of just a pure off-ball guy, whether it's a guy who can move off screens, or even if it's more of a forward size guy who can kind of play either with Brown or with a traditional center. I assume those are probably some top targets. They're just that archetype of player. But Chance is obviously a wild card, but that's another guy who great with the ball in his hands, concerned when he doesn't have the ball in his hands. And it's not necessarily just the 3-point shooting. It's just like his general fit on offense. It's him and a couple other players. So we've seen it even this year where I think apparently playing Malik at the 5 rather than playing him and Naheem together or in whatever combo has spaced things out way more for Syracuse. There's a lot of guys who are kind of going to be on that younger side, mainly more Westry and Donnie, that trio all together in terms of how do you incorporate them in with a bunch of guys who have played together now for a few years. Because that's the story, obviously, for this Syracuse team is that it's a bunch of sophomores who were in the class the previous year. We assume in a good world that a good amount of them, if not all of them, in whatever combo will be back for their junior years. That's an interesting dynamic there that I kind of want to see Autry play with, is balancing this core of veterans with this incoming trio that's got a lot of potential, but obviously got way more on the younger side than the older side.
Again, lineup balance, it's going to be so tricky.
Yeah, different guys who do different things. And Autry has mentioned just wanting to get guys that are versatile, skilled in many areas, dribble, pass, shoot, that sort of thing. This is modern basketball, right? This is kind of the skills that guys have to have at different positions. And if you're going to play with pace and space and want to get up and down, play man-to-man defense, that's kind of the skills that these guys have to have. So, I'm very interested in that and what Autry wants to do going forward in terms of roster construction. And, obviously he recruited some of these guys prior to when he was the head coach. But now with a new style, definitely going to be interested to see his kind of philosophy there as it kind of evolves and as the roster moves along in age and that sort of thing. Dom, I do want to talk about you kind of being down there and a little bit of boots on the ground journalism, but you were down in DC earlier this year for that Georgetown game, if I'm not mistaken, right?
Yep.
Any synergies for you? You're familiar with the arena, familiar with the area. Anything coming?
Great media seating for the record. Yeah, it's not court side, but it's like pretty much right behind the basket, like off to the side. So good venue there. I forget what the capacity is, but I do know like we're hoping at least like with some of these games tomorrow, because honestly, there's a lot of pretty intriguing matchups throughout the day. So again, I'm going to be there the full time because I'll pull it up real quick, but like Notre Dame versus Wake Forest is a good example where Wake Forest should be a favorite, but they've also struggled recently, and Notre Dame just completely destroyed Georgia Tech, and I think they've got the good guards that you kind of need to play well in a postseason. Virginia Tech versus Florida State, kind of just another weird matchup where, for it being the first game, that's not the worst. And then obviously that NC State Syracuse game will be honestly probably on paper, probably the most fun of any of the 4 matchups tomorrow. Wake Forest probably has the most. The Wake Forest game probably has the most, postseason implications, if you will, because if Wake Forest loses, they're probably just done from the bubble period. But in terms of like just game with the most fun matchup there, I think probably I'm not even being biased. Syracuse NC State generally just has like both teams play similarly. Both teams have a limited rotation, kind of like limited ability to with what to work with on the court. Kind of 2 very close games. Even with NC State getting blown out at the start, it was still like a close game down the end, the second half of that first game, and obviously only a 4-point win for Syracuse on the road. So expect it to be close just one way or the other. So I'm excited there. Great venue, though, if anybody is in the DC area, even if you're just going for one of the games, for obviously the Syracuse game. Personally, it's a really good spot for college basketball. So I'm definitely excited to be back courtside, especially for first time since like a few months here. So looking forward to it.
I just hope that it wasn't
Nice.
like the 2014 NC State ACC tournament game. Please.
Is this the one you were showing me, Christian? The
Yes.
mega threes?
You remember that one, James?
I do. There was the loop-de-loop soundtrack in the background of Syracuse.
Oh yeah, the Yakety Sax soundtrack where Syracuse could not hit a shot within the final 30 seconds to save their lives, all on the same possession.
Yeah, that was the TJ Warren years, right?
It was. Yeah, it was.
Yeah, and Syracuse postseason ban. Or no, that was 2014?
2014? That was first year ACC.
First year. Okay. Wow. Has it been 10 years already?
Yeah.
That's unbelievable.
Speaking of anniversaries, you know what we forgot to mention? This is the anniversary of 6 overtimes.
Mm-hmm.
15 years. It's been 15 years since 6 overtimes.
I was in the building that night as a high school junior, and
when did you have to tap
funny
out?
Story.
When were you forced to tap out?
I was there for the full thing. It's actually
congratulations.
Kind of a funny. Yeah, it was kind of like a funny story, but back then, like my mom and I used to go down to the Big East tournament every year. The first year we went down was 2006 when Jerry had his run, and we were there for that, and that was like New York was just magic back then. But the 2009, somewhere along the way, the Big East made you buy the full package, like all the games. So we didn't do it that year, and we scalped tickets, and we went to go into the game, and they were flagged. Like the readers made like a funny beep. They're like, no, fake ticket. Sorry. Some guy in front of me had an extra ticket. He couldn't get rid of it. He saw what happened and he was like, hey man, I got an extra one. If you want it, it's yours. And I was like, well, absolutely. But my mom went back to the hotel to put stuff back. So I called her, let her know what happened. She was devastated. And she was like, well, you just go, like, just go and enjoy the game. She knew how much it meant to me. And she's like, I'll sit here and I'll watch it from the hotel, but enjoy the game, whatever. So I did, and I ended up sitting next to like a couple Syracuse students. I shouldn't admit this, but I was 17 years old at the time, and they offered to buy me beers, and who am I to say no? So I definitely obliged them, and it turned out to be the 6 overtime game, and I felt horrible for my mom, but I was having a great time, and was getting texts from friends and everything from back home who were definitely up way too late for school the next day. So. That was very memorable, but yeah, that's just awesome. That game, incredible. Like the best college basketball game. And Andy Rauten's tying 3 in the third overtime game doesn't get talked about enough. I'll say that. Get on my soapbox and stand for Andy Rauten's.
Yeah, because everyone remembers Eric Devendorf getting denied by video replay.
Devo gets a lot of the show for a good reason. But man, Johnny Flynn was like a warrior in that game. Onuaku, Jackson, big dogs, just all the way to Justin Thomas doing jumping jacks, and so many just moments in that game.
They're also for that UConn team though. There was a lot of names on that team. That's Kemba Walker, Jeff Adrian. I'm pretty sure. I think he was still on there.
Adrian,
Thabit. I totally forgot about Shane Thabit. Oh my god,
Thabit. Yeah,
Paul Harris doing his best no yes impression.
Yeah. Paul was. What did Boeheim say? Paul was even smart enough to miss the dunk to get the 3-point play.
Yeah, something like that. Yeah.
Yeah. John, for the record, Johnny Flynn, 67 minutes that night.
Light.
Yeah, exactly. Light. Yeah.
Some guys don't do that in 2 games.
No.
And then to win in overtime against West Virginia the next night. And Devendorf had like a 60-foot heave before the half that was really memorable too. But yeah, that game was incredible. And Dom, yeah, I mean, Connecticut had guys like Kemba Walker was just a freshman on that team. He had like the putback in one of the overtimes, and yeah, they had dudes like Craig.
I forget what the actual number they are, but I know both Jeff Adrian, Thabit, and Walker all went in the first round for the NBA draft. Like that we always talk about Johnny Flynn a lot because we're in the kind of Syracuse community and like he's a well-known name, but they had three NBA first rounders on that team. That's nuts.
I don't think Jerome Dyson played in that game. I think he was out with an injury. He was so good off the bounce. Yeah, they had AJ Price, Kemba, Stanley Robinson.
Oh, Stanley Robertson. I forgot about him. Holy moly.
Yeah. Gavin Edwards. Who could forget Gavin Edwards? He tipped the pass right before Devendorf. Charles Okwandu. You kind of always had goofy big guys.
Ain't that the truth? Holy moly.
Yeah, Kemba Walker, just a freshman on that team from the Bronx. But yeah, unbelievable game. All right, what else we got to talk about before we get out of here?
Hopefully Syracuse isn't screwed tomorrow.
Yeah.
Don't lose the NC State. Yeah,
we hope DJ Horn
especially-
doesn't drop 30 on us. You know,
Does if most likely Syracuse is not making the NCAA tournament. We're probably expecting them to accept an NIT invite. Does the NIT do the ultimate trolley thing that some NIT bracketologists have thought about? Does the NIT do the thing and schedule Syracuse Seton Hall?
the other one I keep seeing is a Syracuse St. John's too, because half these Big East teams are around the bubble. Villanova.
So who does Syracuse want to face? Do they want to face Kadari Richmond, or do they want to face Colonel Sanders? Because Rick's breaking out a white suit for that game.
Probably. Rick is such a character, but
I guess the only thing I've got is, I guess, do we think it's an auto NIT acceptance in terms of, like, if let's say they lose tomorrow, do we think they still get the NIT?
They're probably a lock for an NIT. I'm not sure if Syracuse will accept an NIT invite, especially if they don't get to host a first round game.
Yeah.
Why say no? Like, I guess you could say, we all know what the NIT is. It's pretty much just extra basketball. Maybe guys don't want to play. Transfer portal's already open, right? Like, that's another consideration. But, like, why not? Why not get your team some more experience and play in the postseason? I don't know.
I'll be honest. Real quick, part of it just might be with this new transfer portal era thing, where I think you probably want to devote more time to that if it's already kind of underway. But I kind of do. This team already has a limited rotation, so maybe you're giving it to the experience to the guys who maybe are more on the back end, shall we say? Which honestly maybe doesn't hurt. Even if they get nuked by 40, people are going to forget the next day because it's the NIT. So maybe no harm, no foul.
You don't have to play Judah Mintz 35 minutes, but get Kyle Cuff in there for some extended run, and Peter Carey some more minutes. Yeah, exactly. I'm all for it, man. Maybe that's being like selfish and wanting more basketball games, but I hope so. I hope if Syracuse doesn't make the tournament, which looks likely, and has an opportunity to play in the NIT, I hope they take that. Maybe that's just me.
We shall see. We'll all know next week.
We'll all know next week for sure. Dom, before we get out of here, I did want to ask you about the women's ACC tournament. Any good food spread down there at the women's tournament?
Question.
The clutch thing was the daily $20 vouchers. It was very basic stadium food, but you know what? It got the job done. Pretzel was really good, I will say. That was probably the best. But yeah.
I'm surprised no dedicated media spread. That's a big.
They'll have something.
Not always from what I saw. I was glued courtside for 3 days, like not really caring what what was on the menu that day, if you will.
Yeah. At Barclays, they had like a full dedicated. This is for like the men's tournament. I don't know if it's totally different from the women's and how that's all set up, but we have seen pictures of like the women's NCAA tournament when that was going on in 2020 and the fiasco that was, but. That's a conversation for a different day. But the men's tournament in Barclays, they always had like full dedicated media spread, ice cream,
incredible,
Starbucks coffee, tea, like anything you could ever want. So I hope
one of the things that
I'll do some scouting.
I know, James, you and I, before we knew each other, we were both at that 2018 ACC tournament in Barclays. The tortellini one of those days is still ingrained into my head.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's great. Yeah. You were down there like Citrus TV, I think.
Yes,
right?
I was. Yeah, I was.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
I remember watching your stuff, and I was like, oh yeah, and that was like the first time I ever saw your stuff, and that's how I knew you before you even joined Nunes.
Very cool. Very cool.
Did you get the ice creams?
I believe I did. Like you had to.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. I think they had like a slushy machine too, unless that's me misremembering.
That's awesome.
It was stuff, dude. Yeah,
Barclays was so good for the ACC tournament. I mean, but especially because it was New York, so you knew you were getting a good crowd no matter what. Because you knew like even the Carolina schools were going to travel. So like even though even though it's majority Syracuse crowd, the Syracuse Wake Forest crowd for that game was very, very good.
Yeah. Yeah, it was electric. There's a ton of Syracuse fans too. I mean,
yeah.
Obviously, the conference doesn't care about that, but yeah.
Like they opened like that was a game where there was pretty good attendance in the second deck.
Yeah. Yep. Syracuse fans always showed up for the ACC tournament. I felt like whenever it was in New York.
Mm-hmm. And that's when they had the extra media seating courtside, which was great.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, all the other outlets go home early, and you got plenty of seats there for people who write for blogs and things, So,
mm-hmm.
But yeah, the ACC tournament's a great time. Dom, I hope you have a great time down there because it's good basketball. It's electric. It's a lot of fun. It's back-to-back basketball, jam-packed food.
I know, right? Yeah. I mean, especially Wednesday, Thursday, it's eight games in like less than 48 hours, which is awesome. And then obviously, what is it? Friday night, Saturday night, both semis in the championship. Like that's an awesome slate, at least for in-person, pretty much courtside basketball with like, especially those games you don't have to write a story on it or anything. So, that's just for pure entertainment.
Yeah, exactly.
Oh yeah.
Brings the fun back to the forefront when you're just watching there without any duties or obligations. All right. Anything else we want to plug, Dom? Obviously you're down there, Christian. Anything you want to plug before we get out of here?
No, not really. I mean, if for you Lax fans, tune into Cornell Lacrosse for my new take. That's all I'm going to do for that.
Dom, anything to plug?
Nothing much outside of 7:00 ESPN2 tomorrow for people not in the DC area in person, and at least for the NunesMagician website, we'll have a ton of coverage, whether it's a loss or a win, over the next kind of 2 to 3 day window here. So just make sure to stay tuned because I know a bunch of us will have a lot to discuss and a lot of topics to write about and just a lot to kind of digest, especially with ACC tournament postseason play and kind of the very, very early conversations with off-season news. So definitely little busy spring here, if you will, regardless of what happens.
Yeah, no doubt. We'll have you covered at NunesMagician.com. Dom on site, boots on the ground from the ACC tournament. But yeah, certainly plenty of storylines to go into this one and out of this one. We'll have you covered the rest of the way. When the season does end, whenever that is, we'll likely have a season recap podcast up at some point. Been wanting to get Jordan Capozzi on. I keep telling him that I want to get him on, and both of our schedules are busy, and I haven't followed up. So we'll try to get Jordan on and some other guys as well that I've made promises to get on this show, but I've had a million other things going on in my personal and professional lives that have kind of put this on back burner. So for everybody listening, for all of you that do care that listen to this show, apologize for that, but try to be back with you more through the rest of the season. And when the season does end, we'll get back on for another episode. But, all right, guys, anything else to add before we conclude?
No, that sounds all right.
Notebook is empty on my end.
All right. All right. So we'll wrap it up for Christian de Guzman and Dom Chapone. I'm James Szuba. Thanks for joining the Syracuse Basketball Podcast. We're out.
See ya.